again, and to anybody who's missed the mini reviews, they're back, and just in time for October. Today I'm going to be reviewing some movies from the Universal Monsters Classics category, starting with 1931's Spanish version of Dracula. This film has become pretty acclaimed in recent years by film critics and horror fans alike, and a few years ago was actually selected for the National Library of Congress. It's a very interesting film, and its production history is just as fascinating. It was made at the exact same time as the Bela Lugosi Dracula. In fact, Universal had the American-speaking actors and crew work on the sets for the film during the day, and then they brought in the Spanish cast and crew and had them film on the exact same sets at night, both movies being made simultaneously. That's pretty cool and interesting, and from what I've read, this isn't the only film where this was done, because I guess no one had yet come up with the idea to dub movies for a foreign release. But yeah, both movies were released at the same time. Lugosi's version for the English-speaking audiences, and Carlos Valerius as Dracula for the Spanish-speaking audiences. And me, myself, I'm a little mixed on the Spanish version. It is better made in some areas than the English version, particularly in camera work and establishing some scenes and character development. The filmmaking, however, can be a little awkward at times. There are several shots in the film that go on for quite a while, and in some cases it works because it lets you know what's going on, but in other cases it feels like the shots linger just a little too long. And it's not just the filmmaking. The cast in this film, the Spanish-speaking cast, they have this weird thing where they will stand around and say their line, and several seconds will go by before the other person speaks their line. It's very slow and just feels weird. I don't think that was intentional. It's not the kind of weird that works for a horror film. It just puts you in a place where you're not sure, is this good or bad? I'm not sure what to make of this. And Carlos Valerius as Dracula. On the one hand, he is a really creepy looking motherfucker. A simple facial expression from him puts you on the edge. He comes off as very threatening. And while I think he has a great horror film presence, there is just one huge drawback to his performance as Dracula. Carlos Valerius has zero sex appeal, which, for the character of Dracula, I feel is a very important aspect. Dracula is evil, threatening, but he's suave and charming. Here, I feel like we get only half of what the character is supposed to be. Now, I know it may sound like I'm being negative, but I do think this is a pretty enjoyable film. Just, you have to really be into black and white movies and the Universal Monster Classics to really get into it. And maybe it's just a language thing. The most Spanish I know is sí, gracias, por favor, and because I've seen Scarface too many times, Morricone. And speaking of not being fluent, the film's director, George Melford, actually could not speak and didn't understand Spanish, which might explain some of the awkward filmmaking and direction the cast appears to have been given. In the end, I prefer the English version, but this is still a very interesting film. I don't think it's great, but it is interesting and worth a watch. And after the release of the English and Spanish versions of Dracula, Universal made a sequel to the Lugosi film titled Dracula's Daughter. And I know what you're thinking, really, really stupid fucking title, showing that sequels were doing them even back then in the 1930s. And while the title may be a little goofy and typical, Dracula's Daughter is actually a Pretty enjoyable film to watch, and has become a pretty appreciated cult classic over the years. Popular vampire book author Anne Rice has labeled Dracula's daughter as a huge influence on her work. And the film is still talked about in regard to it being apparently the first vampire film to feature a theme of lesbianism. There's not a lot of it, it's only in 2 scenes, and by today's standards it's pretty tame. But it is there, and it's interesting to see it in a 1930s film and that they were able to get away with it back then. The movie's not what I would call the ideal sequel to Bela Lugosi's Dracula, but I do think it is competently made, excluding some character development and also the ending, which I found to be a little anticlimactic. The only actor from the first film to come back is Edward Van Sloan as Van Helsing, and it is nice to see him again, but he's used so little you kind of wonder why they even bothered bringing him back. And in fact, watching this film, I think it would have been maybe a little stronger if it had been its own film and excluded anything that connected it to Dracula. With that being said, I still thought it was a very decent film. And last but not least, Gloria Holden as the Countess Maria Zaleska, Drac's daughter. She was great in this role. She has the same amount of sex appeal as Bela Lugosi had, and she has a sense of mystery to her that works pretty well. She could have been a little more threatening at times, but she did a good job playing a very conflicted monster. I say check out both classic films and find out if you enjoy them.